Now, I usually have a problem with Japanese fantasy. The tropes aren't exactly good for the most part. Skills, combat rules that function like a class system in a video game, and the general game world mechanics aren't exactly my thing. So it's rare for me to take to a fantasy series very much unless it approaches things from a more traditional quote-unquote Western style of writing. And yet, I consistently like the most notorious talker runs the world's strongest clan more and more with each and every episode. It's harsh, and it's dark in ways that I generally didn't expect when I first went into it. Synopsis title aside, the show's first episode did not give me a very good impression of it. Following the story of Noel, a young man aiming for fame and glory in spite of his physical limitations due to his quote-unquote class, it had all the hallmarks of a generic game world fantasy about a weak dude actually being the world's strongest, but people are just prejudiced because of his class. It was rough, almost dangerously fast-paced, and felt like it failed to deliver a proper emotional connection to set up the betrayal of the main character the way certain other series like Arifureta or Shield Hero did, and by the end of that first episode, I thought it was just an okay show. However, each episode is consistently more interesting than the last. It starts off selling you this line about a young man chasing his dream of being the greatest seeker, basically a new term for adventure, in the world, and then facing a setback as half his party abandons him after they exhaust all the funds gambling. From there, you get to see that this supposedly noble hero we were sold is actually a very hardcore strategist with no qualms about stepping on other people to achieve his dream. He sells people into slavery to make up for the money they tried to screw him out of. He takes action when clients try to kill him to spare themselves the bill of his services. And he has no issue with taking on troublesome allies simply because he can make use of their talents. And yet, Noel still has a human side to him. To those who are good to him, he's an outstanding ally and a very good friend. But betraying that trust comes with dire consequences, and he doesn't care what people think of that. And it strikes a good balance with him. Someone who would rather be good-natured but isn't afraid to do some really dark stuff if you cross him. He's a nice enough person until you force him to act, and then he is hardened to the world and ready to do what it takes. And so far we've seen one new addition to the party, Alma. While Noel's arc is from light to dark, Alma's almost takes the opposite direction. She's introduced as a crazy former assassin seeking out Noel because his familial relationships. But as time goes on, she seems to get more and more girly, and becomes a more sympathetic character. So in that regard, it actually forms a solid basis for a show. And it does utilize some of the same tropes I complained about earlier, but in a way that I think actually does a good job serving the story, unlike many of these series we see use skill and classes as part of their world. It doesn't feel like it's just tacked on for no reason, which I appreciate. The world could use a bit of fleshing out, but so far it's not been a huge problem. Simultaneously, the production, as in animation and music, could have used some more love and care, but it's still acceptable quality, so in the end, this element is just a neutral aspect of the show. All things considered, it doesn't really have any huge negative aspects. It's enjoyable dark fiction with interesting and compelling characters.